Picture this. You're 7 months pregnant, standing in front of 800 of Silicon Valley's most powerful people, watching your husband publicly announce he's leaving you for your best friend. The cameras are rolling, the world is watching, and you have nowhere to run. This is exactly what happened to Dr. Sarah Mitchell at the Tech Vault annual gala. But here's what nobody knew that night, including her cheating husband Marcus and backstabbing best friend Victoria. Sarah wasn't just another abandoned wife. She was the brilliant mind behind the stolen algorithm that built Marcus's billion-dollar empire. What Sarah discovered next would shock you. The mentor she trusted had been spying on her for 5 years. The FBI case she thought would save her was actually designed to destroy her credibility forever. And the people she loved most were systematically dismantling every piece of her life. But sometimes when you lose everything, you discover what you're really made of. Sometimes betrayal doesn't break you. It reveals the warrior you never knew existed. This is the story of how one woman went from public humiliation to ultimate justice, how a stolen algorithm became the weapon of its creator's revenge, and how the most devastating betrayal in Silicon Valley history backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Buckle up, because this 60-minute journey will show you that underestimating the quiet ones can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows of the Palo Alto mansion as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her silk maternity dress for the third time. 7 months pregnant, she moved carefully around the marble kitchen island, preparing Marcus's favorite protein smoothie. Her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator showed a woman who seemed to have everything: designer clothes, flawless makeup, a home that graced architectural magazines. But reflections could lie. Sarah's fingers traced the counter where she'd once sketched her revolutionary algorithm on a napkin during their MIT days. The algorithm that became the foundation of Tech Vault Industries. The algorithm that made Marcus Sullivan a billionaire while she became his supportive wife. "Are you ready for tonight's announcement?" Marcus asked, striding into the kitchen wearing his signature black turtleneck. His confidence filled the room like expensive cologne. Sarah forced a smile. The new product launch should be exciting. Marcus kissed her forehead absently, already scrolling through his phone. "It's bigger than a product launch, Sarah. Tonight changes everything." The Tech Vault annual gala was Silicon Valley's equivalent of the Met Gala, a showcase where titans announced their next world-changing innovations. Sarah had attended as Marcus's wife for 5 years, watching him receive standing ovations for work that began in her dorm room. "I should get ready," Sarah said, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. "Victoria's coming early to help with your hair," Marcus replied without looking up. "She has such a good eye for these things." Victoria Blake, Sarah's former MIT roommate turned Instagram influencer with 3 million followers. She'd reconnected with Sarah 2 years ago, claiming she missed their friendship and wanted to learn about the tech world. Sarah had welcomed her back eagerly, grateful for female companionship in Marcus's male-dominated circle. The doorbell chimed, and Victoria's voice echoed through the foyer. "Sarah, I'm here to make you gorgeous." Victoria swept in wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her blonde hair was perfectly tousled, her smile camera-ready. "Look at you," Victoria exclaimed, embracing Sarah carefully. "Pregnancy glow is real. You're absolutely radiant." As Victoria worked on Sarah's hair, they chatted about old times, shared jokes, and planned the nursery together. Sarah felt the warm comfort of genuine friendship, something rare in her current world of networking and social climbing. "Marcus seems excited about tonight," Victoria observed, applying Sarah's lipstick with professional precision. "He's been mysterious about the big announcement," Sarah admitted, "but he loves surprises." Victoria's hand paused for just a moment before continuing. "Men and their surprises, sometimes they can be so unpredictable." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, but Sarah dismissed it as imagination. After all, Victoria had become one of her closest confidants, someone who understood both her past and present. That evening, Sarah descended the mansion's curved staircase, wearing a flowing emerald gown that accommodated her pregnancy while still making her feel beautiful. Marcus waited at the bottom, handsome in his tailored tuxedo. "You look perfect," he said, but his tone was oddly clinical. The drive to the Fairmont Hotel passed in comfortable silence. Sarah watched the city lights blur past, thinking about the baby's room they'd finally finished painting last week. Soft yellow walls with white trim, gender neutral because they wanted to be surprised. The hotel ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the conversation of 800 tech industry luminaries. Cameras flashed as Sarah and Marcus posed on the red carpet. She'd learned to angle her body to minimize her pregnancy silhouette. Marcus preferred her to look professional rather than maternal at these events. Ladies and gentlemen, the evening's host announced, please welcome Tech Vault Industries CEO Marcus Sullivan for this evening's keynote address. Sarah found her reserved seat in the front row as Marcus took the stage. His presence commanded the room immediately. 5 years ago, Tech Vault revolutionized data processing with our core algorithm, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. Tonight, I announce the next evolution of our company. Sarah smiled proudly, remembering how nervous Marcus used to get before presentations. She'd helped him practice for hours in their apartment. But first, Marcus continued, I want to share something personal. Great innovations require great partnerships. They require honesty, vision, and the courage to embrace change. Sarah's smile widened. He was going to acknowledge her contributions publicly. After years of standing in the shadows, Marcus was finally going to tell the truth about their collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus's voice grew stronger. I'm honored to introduce my new partner in business and in life. Please welcome Victoria Blake. The spotlight shifted, and Victoria emerged from backstage wearing a stunning red gown. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in the spotlight, waving to the audience as cameras flashed frantically. Sarah's breath caught. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair as confusion flooded her mind. This wasn't the announcement she'd expected. This wasn't supposed to be Victoria's moment. Victoria brings fresh perspective and marketing genius to Tech Vault, Marcus continued as Victoria joined him on stage. But more importantly, she brings honesty to my personal life. The ballroom fell silent except for the mechanical clicks of cameras. Sarah and I are divorcing, Marcus announced with the same tone he'd used to discuss quarterly earnings. Victoria and I are building a future together, both personally and professionally. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. The ballroom spun around her as 800 pairs of eyes turned to stare. Camera flashes exploded like lightning strikes, capturing her shock, her pain, her complete devastation. On stage, Victoria smiled brilliantly and took Marcus's hand, the same hand that had held Sarah's during ultrasound appointments. The same hand that had promised forever just 7 months ago when they learned about the pregnancy. Sarah tried to stand, tried to leave, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Around her, the murmur of voices grew louder as reporters realized they were witnessing the biggest scandal in Silicon Valley history. Marcus's eyes found hers across the ballroom. For just a moment, she saw something that might have been regret. Then his expression hardened, and he looked away. Sarah finally managed to stand, her movements awkward and unsteady. She walked toward the exit as dignity demanded, even as her world collapsed around her. Behind her, she could hear Marcus continuing his presentation, as if he hadn't just destroyed his pregnant wife's life on international television. The hotel lobby felt like an Arctic wasteland. Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, friends, and concerned family members. The doorman helped her into a taxi, his expression professionally neutral despite the obvious drama. As the taxi pulled away from the hotel, Sarah saw the breaking news alert flash across the driver's phone screen. Tech Vault CEO dumps pregnant wife for Instagram influencer at company gala. The algorithm of betrayal had just gone viral, and Sarah Mitchell was the target. The taxi ride home felt eternal. Sarah stared out the window at the familiar Silicon Valley landscape that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Every billboard, every office building, every coffee shop reminded her that this was Marcus's kingdom now, a place where she'd been publicly exiled. Her phone continued its relentless buzzing. Text messages flooded in from acquaintances offering hollow sympathy and journalists requesting statements. Sarah turned off the device, craving silence in the chaos. The mansion's driveway was empty. Marcus's Tesla and Victoria's white BMW were nowhere to be seen. Sarah fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking from adrenaline and shock. The familiar click of the front door opening should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt like entering a mausoleum. The house she'd spent 3 years turning into a home now felt like a stage set. Every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every family photo, every personal touch mocked her with memories of a life that had apparently been an illusion. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, her pregnancy making each step deliberate. The nursery door stood open, revealing the yellow walls they'd painted together just last weekend. The crib Marcus had assembled with theatrical enthusiasm. The mobile she'd chosen because it played Brahms's lullaby. A sob escaped her throat before she could stop it. Then another. Soon she was crying with the kind of raw desperation that came from the soul, sitting on the nursery floor with her back against the wall, her hands protectively covering her belly. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered to her unborn child. "I'm so sorry you have to come into this mess." The doorbell rang at midnight. Sarah ignored it, assuming it was reporters, but the ringing persisted, followed by familiar knocking. "Sarah, open up! I know you're in there." Dr. Elena Rodriguez's voice carried through the door. Sarah's former MIT advisor and current venture capitalist had been like a mother to her during graduate school. Elena was one of the few people Sarah trusted completely. Sarah opened the door to find Elena holding Chinese takeout and wearing an expression of fierce protectiveness. "I saw the news," Elena said simply. "Have you eaten?" They sat in the kitchen while Elena unpacked containers of Sarah's favorite dishes. The older woman's presence was like a warm blanket after stepping in from a blizzard. "I should have seen this coming," Sarah said, picking at her lomoine. "The signs were all there. Marcus becoming distant. Victoria asking so many questions about the business. The late-night meetings that supposedly couldn't wait." Elena set down her chopsticks and fixed Sarah with an intense stare. "How long have you been thinking it was your fault?" "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You're sitting here analyzing your own behavior instead of recognizing that you've been systematically betrayed by two people you trusted." Sarah's defenses crumbled. "What if I wasn't enough? What if I was too focused on the pregnancy, too boring, too—" "Stop!" Elena's voice cut through the self-doubt like a blade. "Marcus Sullivan built his entire empire on your algorithm. The man stole your work, took credit for your innovation, and now he's discarding you like you're some kind of inconvenience. This isn't about you not being enough. This is about him being a thief and a coward." The words hit Sarah like cold water. She'd spent 5 years downplaying her contributions to TechVault, accepting Marcus's narrative that she was the supportive wife rather than the brilliant engineer who'd created the foundation of his success. "I have the original code," Sarah said quietly. "All of it. The notebooks, the prototypes, everything from MIT. I kept it all." Elena leaned forward. "What exactly are you saying?" "Marcus didn't just steal my heart, Elena. He stole my life's work. And I can prove it." A spark of something dangerous flickered in Elena's eyes. "Then let's prove it." They spent the next 3 hours in Sarah's home office, going through boxes of documents, code printouts, and academic papers. Sarah's pregnancy made her movements slower, but her mind was sharp as ever. Every file they examined revealed more evidence of Marcus's theft. "Look at this," Sarah said, pulling out a notebook from her MIT days. "The original algorithm dated 18 months before TechVault's incorporation. My handwriting, my signature." Elena photographed each page with her phone. "This is gold, Sarah. Absolute gold." "But what good does it do me now? He's already won. He has the company, the reputation, the money, and now he has Victoria too." Elena stood up and paced to the window overlooking the city lights. "You know what your problem is? You're thinking like a victim instead of like the brilliant strategist I taught at MIT. I don't feel very brilliant right now. Feelings aren't facts. The fact is, you created something revolutionary. The fact is, it was stolen from you. The fact is, you have evidence. And the fact is that Marcus Sullivan just made the biggest mistake of his life by underestimating you." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. A small ember of anger began to glow where despair had been consuming everything. "What are you suggesting?" Elena turned from the window with a smile that was equal parts maternal and predatory. "I'm suggesting we remind Silicon Valley who the real genius is in this story. But I'm 7 months pregnant. I'm about to be divorced. I have no money, no company, no platform. You have something better than all of that, Elena said. You have the truth. And in this industry, the truth has a way of burning down empires built on lies. Sarah looked around the office that had been her sanctuary for 3 years. The walls were covered with her architectural sketches for the house, her coding certifications, and photos from MIT. This was who she really was. Not Marcus's accessory, but Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd revolutionized data processing before she was 25. Where do we start? Sarah asked. Elena's smile widened. We start by making some calls. I know every major investor in the Valley, every journalist who covers tech, every board member who values innovation over personality. Marcus thinks he's untouchable because he's charming and you're quiet. He's about to learn that quiet people aren't weak people. This could get ugly. Honey, it's already ugly. The question is whether you want to lie down and let them walk over you, or whether you want to stand up and fight for what's rightfully yours. Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. Her child deserved better than a mother who accepted defeat. Her child deserved to know that their mother was a fighter, a creator, a force to be reckoned with. Let's burn it all down, Sarah said quietly. Elena's laugh was like music. Now you sound like the woman who built an algorithm that changed the world. As dawn broke over Silicon Valley, Sarah Mitchell began planning her resurrection. She had no idea that her enemies had anticipated her every move, and that her first attempt at justice would lead to an even deeper betrayal. But for now, in the quiet hours before the storm, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the thrill of being truly herself again. The Code Thief's victory was about to face its first real challenge. Sarah spent the following week transforming her home office into a war room. Elena visited daily, bringing coffee, legal advice, and most importantly, connections. They compiled evidence methodically: original code, dated notebooks, email records, and academic papers that proved Sarah's authorship of TechVault's core technology. We need to be strategic about this, Elena explained, spreading documents across Sarah's desk. We can't just dump evidence and hope for the best. We need to control the narrative. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Elena would arrange a meeting with TechVault's board of directors, presenting Sarah's case for intellectual property theft. Simultaneously, Sarah would reach out to tech journalists who specialized in Silicon Valley scandals. The combination of legal pressure and media attention would force Marcus to acknowledge her contributions and provide appropriate compensation. What about Marcus's reaction? Sarah asked, her hand resting on her belly. The baby had been more active lately, as if sensing the tension. Let him react, Elena said firmly. Angry people make mistakes, and we'll be ready for whatever he throws at us. Sarah's confidence grew as the plan took shape. For the first time since the gala, she felt in control of her destiny. She wasn't just the pregnant woman who'd been publicly humiliated. She was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, reclaiming her intellectual property and her reputation. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Sarah dressed carefully in a navy blue maternity suit that projected professionalism while accommodating her pregnancy. She'd practiced her presentation dozens of times, anticipating every possible question and objection. TechVault's headquarters gleamed like a modern cathedral, its glass facades reflecting the California sun. Sarah had helped choose this building 3 years ago, working with architects to create spaces that fostered innovation. Now she was entering as an outsider, seeking justice. Elena met her in the lobby, impeccably dressed and radiating confidence. Remember, we're not asking for charity. We're demanding recognition of your rightful intellectual property. The boardroom on the 20th floor overlooked the entire valley. 8 executives sat around a mahogany table, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Sarah recognized most of them from company parties where she'd played the role of Marcus's supportive wife. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena began, we're here to discuss a matter of intellectual property that forms the foundation of TechVault Industries. Sarah opened her laptop and began her presentation. She walked through the timeline methodically: her graduate research at MIT, the development of the algorithm, her collaboration with Marcus, and his subsequent appropriation of her work. As you can see, Sarah said, displaying her original code on the conference room screen, the core algorithm that drives TechVault's success was developed entirely by me between January and September of 2018. Mr. Sullivan's contributions were limited to business development and marketing. The room was silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Sarah could feel the weight of their attention, could see several board members taking notes. "This is quite a serious allegation," said Board Chairman Robert Chen. "Do you have additional documentation to support this claim?" Sarah smiled. This was exactly the question she'd hoped for. She produced 3 notebooks, 2 academic papers, and a series of emails that established an unbreakable timeline of her work. "Furthermore," Elena added, "Dr. Mitchell is prepared to demonstrate the algorithm's functionality using variations that were never implemented in TechVault's commercial product." For 45 minutes, Sarah presented her case with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of someone fighting for her life's work. She answered every question, addressed every concern, and watched several board members' expressions shift from skepticism to belief. "We'll need time to review this material," Chairman Chen said finally, "but I want to assure Dr. Mitchell that this board takes intellectual property matters very seriously." As they left the building, Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. "That went perfectly," she told Elena. "Did you see how they responded when I showed them the original algorithm variations?" "You were brilliant," Elena agreed. "Absolutely brilliant. Marcus is going to have a very difficult conversation with his board tomorrow." That evening, Sarah allowed herself to imagine victory. Maybe she'd get her rightful credit. Maybe she'd receive financial compensation. Maybe her child would grow up knowing their mother was a respected innovator rather than a tabloid footnote. Her optimism lasted exactly 18 hours. Elena called Friday morning, her voice tight with anger. "Sarah, we have a problem. A big problem." "What happened?" "I just got off the phone with Chairman Chen. Marcus held an emergency board meeting last night." Sarah's stomach dropped. "And?" "He told them you've been struggling with pregnancy-related mental health issues. He showed them emails where you expressed concerns about memory problems and emotional instability. He painted your presentation as the desperate fantasy of someone experiencing a psychological breakdown." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "Those emails were private conversations about normal pregnancy symptoms. I mentioned being forgetful and emotional, not unstable." "It gets worse," Elena continued. "He's obtained a restraining order against you, claiming you've been harassing him and Victoria. The order prevents you from contacting TechVault employees or coming within 500 feet of company property." Sarah sank into her desk chair, her hands shaking. "How is that possible? I haven't harassed anyone." "He's twisting everything. Your calls to board members yesterday are now being characterized as stalking. Your evidence presentation is being called an attempt to extort money through false claims." The room spun around Sarah as the implications became clear. Marcus hadn't just anticipated her move. He'd set a trap. While she'd been preparing her case, he'd been preparing his defense, turning her pregnancy symptoms into weapons against her credibility. "Elena, what do I do now?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched too long. Finally, Elena's voice came through, smaller than before. "I don't know, Sarah. I honestly don't know." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her office staring at the evidence that had seemed so powerful just 24 hours earlier. The notebooks and emails that should have proven her case now felt like monuments to her naivety. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Nice try, Sarah, but I've always been better at playing the game." M. She threw the phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. The baby kicked hard, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. Sarah pressed her hands to her belly and tried to breathe. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. Mommy thought she was smarter than she actually is. Outside her window, Silicon Valley continued its relentless march toward the future. Somewhere in that landscape of innovation and ambition, Marcus Sullivan was probably celebrating his latest victory. And Victoria Blake was probably posting Instagram stories about her exciting new life as a tech executive's girlfriend. Sarah had struck her first blow in the war for her intellectual property and her dignity. She'd lost spectacularly, and now she was worse off than before. The restraining order meant she couldn't even approach the building where her stolen algorithm was generating millions in revenue. But deep in her chest, beneath the despair and humiliation, a small flame of anger continued to burn. Marcus had won this battle by being more ruthless than she'd imagined possible. If Sarah wanted to win the war, she'd have to learn to fight on his level. The question was whether she had the strength to become the kind of person who could beat Marcus Sullivan at his own game. And whether she could do it before her child was born into a world where their mother was remembered as a failed extortionist rather than a brilliant engineer. The first strike had failed, but the war was far from over. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had always been Sarah's anchor in the storm, so when she called 3 weeks after the restraining order disaster with excitement in her voice, Sarah felt her first glimmer of hope in ages. "I've been doing some quiet investigation," Elena said over coffee in Sarah's kitchen. "Marcus isn't as untouchable as he thinks he is." Sarah looked up from her laptop where she'd been researching landlord-tenant law. With divorce proceedings looming and her access to joint accounts frozen, she was facing the reality of needing to find somewhere more affordable to live. "What kind of investigation?" Elena pulled out a thick folder. "Financial irregularities. Marcus has been moving money through offshore accounts, claiming research and development expenses that don't match any actual R&D projects. I have contacts at 3 different investment firms who are starting to ask questions. Elena, I can't afford to get involved in another legal battle. The restraining order means I can't even—" "You don't understand," Elena interrupted. "This isn't about your intellectual property anymore. This is about federal financial crimes, securities fraud, tax evasion, the kind of charges that destroy people regardless of how charming they are." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "You're talking about going to the FBI. I'm talking about justice, Sarah. Real justice. Not just getting credit for your algorithm, but watching Marcus face consequences for every crime he's committed." The plan Elena outlined was meticulous. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd been reaching out to former Tech Vault employees, investors, and business partners. A pattern of financial misconduct emerged that went far beyond stealing Sarah's code. "Marcus has been cooking the books for years," Elena explained, "inflating user numbers, hiding expenses, lying to investors about revenue projections. The Tech Vault success story is built on fraud from top to bottom." Sarah studied the documents Elena had compiled. Bank records, email exchanges, financial statements that told a story of systematic deception. It was overwhelming and convincing. "Why didn't anyone notice this before?" "People see what they want to see," Elena said. "Marcus is charismatic. He tells a good story, and everyone was making money, so nobody looked too closely at the details." "Except you," Elena smiled grimly. "I've been in this business for 20 years. I know what real innovation looks like, and I know what dressed-up theft looks like. Marcus is a con artist who got lucky when he met you." The evidence was compelling, but Sarah hesitated. Her last attempt at confronting Marcus had backfired spectacularly. She was now 8 months pregnant, facing divorce proceedings, and living under a restraining order that painted her as unstable. "What if this goes wrong too? What if he has some way to turn this against me?" "He can't," Elena said confidently. "Federal financial crimes are investigated by the FBI, not local courts where Marcus has influence. The evidence speaks for itself. Numbers don't lie the way people do." Elena's confidence was infectious. She'd built her venture capital firm by being able to spot both opportunities and frauds from miles away. If she believed Marcus was vulnerable, maybe he really was. "How do we approach the FBI?" "I have a contact. Agent Patricia Williams specializes in white-collar crime in Silicon Valley. She's built her career on taking down exactly this type of operation." They spent the afternoon organizing the evidence into a presentation that would be compelling to federal investigators. Elena's business acumen combined with Sarah's technical knowledge created a devastating portrait of Marcus's crimes. "This feels different," Sarah said as they finished. "More solid, like we're actually prepared this time." "Because we are prepared," Elena replied. "Marcus won this round by being more ruthless than you expected. But he can't lie his way out of bank records and audit trails." Agent Williams agreed to meet them the following Thursday at the FBI's San Francisco field office. Sarah dressed carefully in a conservative black dress that projected both professionalism and credibility. She'd practiced her presentation until she could deliver it flawlessly, even with the distraction of her increasingly active baby. The federal building was imposing in its concrete authority. Agent Williams met them in a sterile conference room that smelled like industrial coffee and determination. "Dr. Rodriguez has given me a preliminary overview of your concerns," Agent Williams said. But I'd like to hear the details directly from you, Dr. Mitchell. Sarah launched into her presentation with growing confidence. She walked through Marcus's financial irregularities, his pattern of deception, and the systematic fraud that underpinned TechVault's apparent success. Agent Williams took detailed notes and asked pointed questions that demonstrated genuine interest. "This is substantial," Agent Williams said after reviewing the evidence. "We'll need to verify these documents independently, but this appears to warrant a federal investigation." Sarah felt victory within reach. Marcus had outmaneuvered her in the corporate world, but he couldn't outmaneuver the federal government. "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "We'll need you to sign some paperwork formalizing your complaint. Then we'll begin preliminary investigations. If the evidence holds up, we'll move forward with a full criminal investigation." Elena squeezed Sarah's hand under the table. After months of feeling powerless, Sarah was finally fighting back, with weapons that Marcus couldn't deflect or dismiss. They signed the paperwork and left the federal building feeling triumphant. Sarah had been beaten down by Marcus's corporate games, but she'd found a new battlefield where truth mattered more than charm. "How long before they move forward?" Sarah asked as they walked to Elena's car. "Federal investigations take time, but Williams seemed genuinely interested. I'd expect some action within the next few weeks." That evening, Sarah felt genuinely hopeful for the first time since the gala. She was finally fighting back effectively, using Marcus's own arrogance against him. He'd grown careless in his success, leaving trails of evidence that would ultimately destroy him. She went to bed early, her hand resting on her belly as the baby moved restlessly. "Daddy's going to face consequences for what he did to us," she whispered. "Justice is coming." Sarah slept better that night than she had in months, dreaming of courtrooms where truth prevailed and criminals faced consequences regardless of their wealth or charisma. She had no idea that Elena Rodriguez had been playing a much longer game than anyone realized, and that the safety she felt was actually the most dangerous position she'd ever been in. The trap was about to spring shut around her, and this time there would be no escape. Sarah woke up Friday morning feeling lighter than she had in months. The FBI meeting had gone perfectly, and Agent Williams had seemed genuinely committed to investigating Marcus's crimes. For the first time since the gala, Sarah felt like she was winning. Her optimism lasted exactly 47 minutes. Elena called at 8:15, her voice strangely formal. "Sarah, we need to meet. There's been a development in the FBI situation." "Good news or bad news?" A pause that lasted too long. "We should discuss this in person." They met at a coffee shop in downtown Palo Alto, far from Sarah's neighborhood, where reporters occasionally lurked hoping for photos of the scorned tech wife. Elena arrived carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression Sarah had never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost predatory. "The FBI investigation has been suspended," Elena said without preamble. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "What do you mean suspended?" "Agent Williams called me this morning. Apparently some irregularities were discovered in the evidence we provided." "What kind of irregularities?" Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a legal document. "It seems that several of the financial records we submitted were fabricated. Agent Williams is concerned that we were attempting to file a false report against a prominent CEO." Sarah stared at the document, her mind struggling to process the words. "That's impossible. You verified all those records yourself." "Sarah," Elena's voice was gentle now, almost pitying, "I think the stress of your situation may have clouded your judgment. Some of the documents you provided to me appear to have been altered." "I didn't alter anything." Sarah's voice rose, causing other patrons to stare. "Elena, you know I didn't fabricate evidence. You were there when we compiled everything." Elena's expression remained neutral, professional. "I'm concerned about you, Sarah. The failed intellectual property claim, now this attempt to file false criminal charges, it suggests a pattern of behavior that's concerning." The world tilted around Sarah. Her mentor, her closest ally, was suggesting she was mentally unstable. "Elena, you know me. You've known me for 8 years. You know I would never fabricate evidence. I know the Sarah I taught at MIT, but pregnancy can cause significant psychological changes. Combined with the stress of your divorce and public humiliation." "Stop." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Just stop." Elena leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine concern. Sarah, I think you need professional help. The kind of behavior you've been exhibiting, the false claims, the evidence fabrication, the obsession with proving Marcus wrong, these aren't the actions of someone thinking clearly. Sarah felt her chest tightening, making it hard to breathe. You're working with him. I'm sorry. You're working with Marcus. This whole thing was a setup. Elena's laugh was soft and pitying. Sarah, that's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking I'm worried about. Not everyone is conspiring against you. But Sarah's mind was racing now, connecting dots she'd been too trusting to see. Elena's sudden interest in helping, her mysterious sources of information about Marcus's finances, her confidence that the FBI would be interested in their case. How long? Sarah asked quietly. How long what? How long have you been working with Marcus? Elena's mask finally slipped, just for a moment. A flicker of something cold and satisfied crossed her face before the concerned expression returned. Sarah, you're having some kind of episode. This paranoid thinking is dangerous for you and your baby. Answer me, Elena. How long have you been working with Marcus? Elena sighed and closed her briefcase. Since about 6 months after you graduated from MIT. The admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? Marcus contacted me when Tech Vault started gaining traction. He was concerned about potential intellectual property claims from former students. I assured him that you were too focused on domestic life to be a threat. Sarah's hands began to shake. You've been reporting on me to Marcus for 5 years? I've been protecting a valuable business relationship. Marcus pays my firm a substantial consulting fee for technology evaluation services. And monitoring his ex-student? Elena's smile was sharp now, no longer pretending warmth. Among other things, the coffee shop around them seemed to fade away as Sarah realized the depth of her betrayal. Elena hadn't just been working with Marcus. She'd been actively sabotaging Sarah's attempts to reclaim her intellectual property. The evidence we showed to the FBI? Carefully crafted to be obviously fake upon professional examination. Agent Williams is a thorough investigator. She spotted the inconsistencies immediately. You destroyed my credibility. I protected Marcus's business interests. Nothing personal, Sarah, just business. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Other customers turned to stare at the pregnant woman whose face had gone pale with shock. You were my teacher, my mentor. I trusted you completely. Elena remained seated, perfectly composed. And that trust has been very useful. Marcus needed to know what you were planning so he could stay ahead of your moves. Why? Sarah's voice cracked. Why would you do this to me? Because Marcus Sullivan is going to revolutionize the technology industry, and being on his team is worth far more than sentimentality about a former student. Elena stood and adjusted her jacket with businesslike efficiency. Sarah, I strongly recommend you seek psychiatric care. The pattern of false accusations and evidence fabrication suggests serious mental health issues that could affect your fitness as a mother. The threat was clear. Elena wasn't just cutting ties. She was positioning herself to testify against Sarah in any future custody proceedings. One last piece of advice, Elena said, picking up her briefcase. Stop fighting battles you can't win. You're a brilliant engineer, but you're terrible at corporate warfare. Marcus is simply better at this game than you are. Elena walked away, leaving Sarah alone at a table littered with the debris of her shattered trust. Around her, normal people continued their normal conversations about normal problems. None of them had just discovered that their closest ally had been working for their enemy for 5 years. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. I told you I've always been better at playing the game. Your friend Elena sends her regards. The baby kicked hard, responding to Sarah's elevated stress levels. She pressed her hands to her belly and tried to breathe, but the coffee shop felt like it was closing in around her. She'd been completely alone for months without realizing it. Every conversation with Elena, every piece of advice, every moment of apparent support had been a lie designed to keep Marcus ahead of her moves. Sarah finally understood why Marcus had seemed so confident at the gala. He'd known she would try to fight back because Elena had been reporting her every plan. He'd been ready for the intellectual property claim, ready for the FBI complaint, ready for everything because he'd had a spy in Sarah's inner circle from the beginning. Walking out of the coffee shop into the harsh California sunshine, Sarah realized she was facing the complete destruction of her life. She had no allies, no credibility, no resources. She was 8 months pregnant, facing divorce proceedings, and now potentially facing questions about her mental health and fitness as a mother. Marcus hadn't just stolen her algorithm and married her best friend. He'd systematically destroyed every avenue of resistance, every relationship she might have used to fight back. For the first time since the gala, Sarah wondered if she should simply surrender. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe she was terrible at corporate warfare. Maybe it was time to stop fighting battles she couldn't win. But as she stood on the sidewalk with her hand on her belly, feeling her baby's strong kicks, Sarah realized surrender wasn't an option. Her child deserved better than a mother who gave up when things got difficult. She'd been betrayed by everyone she trusted. She'd lost every battle she'd tried to fight. But somewhere in the wreckage of her shattered life, there had to be a way forward. She just had to find it before Marcus destroyed what little she had left. The betrayal by Elena left Sarah in complete isolation. Returning to her empty mansion, she realized how thoroughly Marcus had orchestrated her destruction. Every ally had been compromised, every strategy anticipated, every move countered before she'd even made it. Sarah spent the weekend in a haze of shock and grief. She'd lost her husband, her best friend, her mentor, her credibility, and potentially her freedom. The baby kicked constantly now, as if sensing the chaos in her mother's emotional state. Monday morning brought the first catastrophe. Sarah woke to find her credit cards declined and her bank accounts frozen. A letter from Marcus's attorney explained that due to her unstable behavior and attempts to defraud federal investigators, all joint financial accounts had been suspended pending psychiatric evaluation. She called the bank, hoping for some explanation or recourse. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan," the representative said, "but your husband has provided documentation suggesting you may be experiencing a mental health crisis. For your protection and his, all accounts require dual authorization until this matter is resolved." "My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell," she corrected automatically, "and I'm 8 months pregnant. I need access to money for food and medical care. You'll need to work with your husband's legal team to resolve this matter." Sarah hung up and stared at her laptop screen. She had $17 in her personal checking account and a mortgage payment due in 2 weeks. Marcus had effectively made her destitute overnight. The doorbell rang at noon. Sarah opened it to find a courier with an envelope from a legal firm she didn't recognize. Inside was an eviction notice. Marcus had apparently purchased her mortgage from the bank and was foreclosing immediately due to non-payment and breach of trust. She had 30 days to vacate the home she'd spent 3 years turning into a sanctuary. Sarah sank onto the couch, the legal papers scattered around her. In less than 72 hours, she'd gone from fighting for justice to fighting for basic survival. The second catastrophe arrived that evening in the form of Victoria Blake. Victoria appeared on Sarah's doorstep wearing designer maternity wear and carrying an expensive handbag. She was also visibly pregnant, maybe 4 months along. "Hello, Sarah," Victoria said with fake sweetness. "We need to talk." Sarah stared at Victoria's rounded belly, doing rapid mental calculations. "How far along are you?" 16 weeks. "Isn't it exciting? Marcus and I are having a boy." The math was devastating. Victoria had gotten pregnant while Marcus was still married to Sarah, while Sarah herself was carrying his child. "You came here to gloat?" Sarah asked. Victoria pushed past Sarah into the foyer. "I came here to offer you a way out of this mess you've created." "What mess I've created?" "The false accusations, the evidence fabrication, the attempt to defraud the FBI." She turned around and Victoria's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Marcus could have you charged with multiple felonies, but he's willing to be generous." Victoria pulled out a legal document from her handbag. "Sign this and all criminal charges will be dropped. You'll receive a small settlement to help with the baby, and Marcus will ensure you're not prosecuted for filing false reports." Sarah scanned the document. It was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would prevent her from ever discussing her relationship with Marcus, her work on the algorithm, or the circumstances of their divorce. In exchange, she'd receive $50,000 in immunity from prosecution. "This is extortion," Sarah said. "This is mercy," Victoria corrected. "The alternative is federal charges for filing false reports, state charges for harassment and stalking, and a very public custody battle where your mental health will be thoroughly examined. Victoria placed her hand on her own belly in a gesture that mirrored Sarah's protective instincts. Think about your baby, Sarah. Do you really want to raise a child from prison? You can't take my child. We don't want to take your child. We want you to disappear quietly so we can build our family without the drama you've created. Sarah felt trapped between impossible choices: sign the agreement and accept defeat, or refuse and face criminal prosecution while 8 months pregnant. I need time to think. Victoria checked her expensive watch. You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, Marcus will proceed with criminal charges. Victoria paused at the door. For what it's worth, Sarah, I hope you make the smart choice. Your baby deserves at least one parent who's not in prison. The third catastrophe began 6 hours later. Sarah was lying in bed trying to process her impossible situation when she felt the first sharp pain in her abdomen. She ignored it initially, assuming it was normal, late pregnancy discomfort. The second pain was stronger, accompanied by a tightening sensation that made her gasp. By the third contraction, Sarah realized she was going into premature labor. She called 911, her voice shaking as she described her symptoms. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but the 20-minute ride to the hospital felt eternal. Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, the EMT told her. We need to get you to the hospital immediately. In the emergency room, Dr. Patricia Chen examined Sarah with efficient professionalism. You're experiencing preterm labor, likely triggered by severe stress. We're going to try to stop the contractions and keep the baby inside for a few more weeks. Is my baby going to be okay? We're going to do everything we can, but I need you to stay calm and avoid any additional stress. Sarah almost laughed. Avoid stress while facing eviction, criminal charges, financial ruin, and custody threats. The medication stopped the contractions, but Dr. Chen's expression remained concerned. Mrs. Mitchell, your stress levels are extremely dangerous for both you and your baby. Is there someone we can call? Family? Friends? Sarah stared at the hospital ceiling. Her parents lived across the country and barely spoke to her since she'd married Marcus. Her sister was deployed overseas with the military. Elena had betrayed her. Victoria was carrying her husband's child. There's no one, Sarah said quietly. Dr. Chen sat on the edge of the bed. Sarah, I'm going to be very direct with you. If your stress levels don't decrease significantly, you're at serious risk of losing this baby. Whatever is happening in your life, you need to find a way to resolve it quickly. I can't resolve it. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible, but you have to prioritize your baby's health over everything else. Sarah closed her eyes and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She was lying in a hospital bed, alone and broke, while her husband and former best friend prepared to build a life together. She was facing criminal charges for trying to reclaim her stolen work. She was about to be evicted from her home and potentially separated from her child, and now her baby's life was in danger because of the stress caused by all of it. I don't know what to do anymore, Sarah whispered. Dr. Chen squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes when everything falls apart, that's when we discover what we're really made of. But as Sarah lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors tracking her baby's heartbeat, she couldn't imagine how anyone could survive the systematic destruction Marcus had orchestrated. She had 36 hours to decide whether to sign Victoria's agreement or face criminal prosecution while trying to save her pregnancy. For the first time since the gala, Sarah wondered if maybe Elena had been right. Maybe she really was terrible at corporate warfare. Maybe it was time to accept defeat before she lost the only thing that truly mattered: her baby's life. The three catastrophes had left her with no good choices and no hope of victory. All she had left was the decision of how to surrender. Sarah spent 3 days in the hospital while doctors monitored her blood pressure and the baby's vitals. The stress-induced complications had stabilized, but Dr. Chen was adamant about the need for complete rest and elimination of external pressures. I'm discharging you tomorrow, Dr. Chen said during her evening rounds. But you need a safe, stable environment. Do you have somewhere to go? Sarah stared out the window at the Silicon Valley skyline that had once felt like home. I'm working on it. She wasn't working on it. She was lying in a hospital bed with nowhere to go and no one to call. The eviction notice gave her 3 more weeks, but she couldn't afford the mortgage payments anyway. Marcus's legal team had made it clear that any attempt to contest the foreclosure would be met with immediate criminal charges. Victoria's non-disclosure agreement sat on the bedside table, unsigned. $50,000 in exchange for her silence and dignity. It would be enough to rent a small apartment and buy time to figure out her next move. Or she could refuse to sign and face federal charges while 8 months pregnant and homeless. The knock on her hospital room door came at 9 p.m. Sarah expected another nurse with medication, but instead found a man in his 60s wearing work clothes and an expression of barely controlled anger. "Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes, I'm your father." Sarah hadn't seen James Mitchell in 3 years. Their relationship had been strained since her marriage to Marcus, who had made it clear that Sarah's working-class father didn't fit the image he wanted to project. Sarah had chosen Marcus over family dinners and Christmas visits, a decision that felt monumentally stupid now. "Dad, how did you know I was here?" James pulled up the visitor's chair and sat down heavily. "I saw the news about your husband's announcement. Then I heard about the FBI investigation and the hospitalization. Figured it was time I paid my daughter a visit. I didn't know you were following my situation. I follow everything that happens to my daughter, even when she's too busy being a tech executive's wife to return my phone calls." The criticism stung because it was accurate. Sarah had distanced herself from her family to fit into Marcus's world, and now she was paying the price for that choice. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I haven't been—" "Save it," James interrupted. "We can talk about family dynamics later. Right now, I want to know what you're going to do about that bastard who destroyed my daughter's life." Sarah blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" James pulled out a tablet and showed her a news article. "Marcus Sullivan isn't just a cheating husband, Sarah. He's a con artist who's been running scams for years." The article was from a financial investigation website that specialized in exposing corporate fraud. It detailed a pattern of suspicious business practices dating back to before TechVault, including 2 previous companies that had collapsed under questionable circumstances. "Where did you get this?" "I've been doing my own research since that gala humiliation. Unlike your fancy MIT professors, I know how to investigate someone without them knowing about it." Sarah scrolled through the article, her mind racing. The information was devastating. Bank records, former business partner testimonies, regulatory filings that painted Marcus as a serial fraud perpetrator. "Dad, this is incredible. But Elena Rodriguez already tried to build a case against Marcus for financial crimes. It backfired because she was working with him the whole time." James smiled grimly. "Elena Rodriguez is a venture capitalist who moves in Marcus's circles. I'm a construction contractor who knows how to dig up dirt without leaving fingerprints." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been building a case against Marcus Sullivan for 6 months, and I've been very careful about who I trust with information." James pulled out a thick folder from his work bag. Bank records from 3 different offshore accounts. Testimony from former employees who were pressured to falsify documents. Evidence of tax evasion going back 5 years. Sarah stared at the documents, hardly daring to hope. "How did you get all this?" "Turns out when you spend 40 years building houses, you meet a lot of people. Accountants, lawyers, government employees. People who don't like seeing rich boys steal from honest workers." But Elena said federal investigators spotted fabricated evidence immediately. "Because Elena Rodriguez gave them fabricated evidence. The real evidence is rock solid." James leaned forward, his voice intense. "Sarah, your husband isn't just a cheater. He's a criminal who's been stealing from investors and employees for years. The algorithm he stole from you is just the beginning." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a spark of hope. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we destroy Marcus Sullivan the same way he destroyed you. Completely and publicly. Dad, I'm 8 months pregnant and facing criminal charges. I can't fight another legal battle." "You won't have to. I've already been fighting it." James pulled out his phone and showed her a contact list. FBI agent Patricia Williams, Securities and Exchange Commission investigator Robert Chen, IRS Criminal Investigation Division agent Maria Santos. "You've been talking to federal investigators?" "I've been providing them with evidence. Real evidence, not the garbage Elena Rodriguez fed them. They're very interested in Marcus Sullivan." Sarah felt her heart racing, but this time from excitement rather than fear. What do they say? They say they have enough evidence to prosecute Marcus for multiple felonies. They're just waiting for the right moment to move. When? James smiled for the first time since entering the room. Tomorrow morning. Marcus Sullivan is going to be arrested at the Tech Vault offices in front of every reporter and investor in Silicon Valley. Sarah stared at her father in amazement. While she'd been playing corporate games and trusting the wrong people, James Mitchell had been quietly building an airtight case against her ex-husband. How long have you been planning this? Since the day that pompous ass made it clear I wasn't good enough to be part of your life. I've been waiting for him to screw up badly enough to give me an opening. And the gala provided that opening? The gala proved he was reckless enough to think he was untouchable. Men like Marcus always get careless when they think they've won completely. Sarah felt tears building in her eyes, but they were tears of relief rather than despair. Dad, I don't know what to say. Say you're ready to watch justice get served. What about Victoria's ultimatum? She wants me to sign an NDA by tomorrow noon, or they'll file criminal charges. James laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Victoria Blake is going to have bigger problems than non-disclosure agreements. Turns out pregnant mistresses aren't exempt from accessory charges when they help cover up financial crimes. She's going to be arrested too? She's been helping Marcus move money through her social media accounts. The FBI is very interested in her banking records. Sarah closed her eyes and let the relief wash over her. After months of feeling helpless and outmaneuvered, she was finally going to see Marcus face consequences for his actions. There's one more thing, James said quietly. The algorithm you developed at MIT, the real one, not the simplified version Marcus commercialized. What about it? The government wants to license it for national security applications. They're offering a very substantial licensing fee. How substantial? Enough to buy your own company and compete directly with TechVault. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her father with newfound respect. James Mitchell might not have an MIT education or venture capital connections, but he understood justice and he understood how to fight for his family. Dad, why did you do all this? James took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. Because you're my daughter, and nobody gets to destroy my daughter's life without consequences. For the first time since the gala, Sarah felt truly safe. Not because she was hiding or surrendering, but because she finally had an ally who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or turned against her. Marcus Sullivan was about to learn that corporate warfare had rules, but family loyalty didn't. And Sarah Mitchell was about to discover that sometimes the best revenge came not from playing the game better, but from changing the rules entirely. Sarah checked out of the hospital early the next morning, riding in her father's pickup truck toward TechVault headquarters. James had insisted she witness Marcus's arrest in person, arguing that she deserved to see justice served after months of systematic abuse. Are you sure this is safe for the baby? Sarah asked as they pulled into the parking garage across from TechVault. Dr. Chen cleared you for light activity. Watching your ex-husband get arrested definitely qualifies as therapeutic. James had orchestrated the timing perfectly. The arrest was scheduled for 10 a.m., just as Marcus would be arriving for TechVault's quarterly board meeting. The parking garage provided a clear view of the company's main entrance without requiring Sarah to violate the restraining order. The FBI agents are already in position, James said, checking his phone. Agent Williams says they've been watching Marcus's offshore account since 6 a.m. 3 separate wire transfers to the Cayman Islands this morning. He's still moving money? Right up until the end. Guys like Marcus can't help themselves. They think they're smarter than everyone else. Sarah watched the familiar TechVault building where she'd attended so many meetings as Marcus's supportive wife. The glass facade reflected the morning sun, creating an illusion of transparency that masked the corruption inside. Marcus's Tesla pulled into the executive parking space at exactly 9:58 a.m. Sarah could see him through the windshield, checking his phone one final time before stepping out. He looked confident, untouchable, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. Victoria emerged from the passenger side, her pregnancy visible even from across the street. She wore a designer maternity dress and carried herself with the authority of someone who believed she'd successfully stolen another woman's life. They walked toward the building entrance together, Marcus's hand possessively on Victoria's back. Sarah felt a stab of pain watching them, but it was overwhelmed by anticipation of what was about to happen. At exactly 10 a.m., three black SUVs pulled up to the tech vault entrance. FBI agents emerged with the coordinated precision of a military operation. Agent Williams led the team, wearing a bulletproof vest with FBI clearly visible on the back. Marcus froze on the sidewalk as agents surrounded him. Sarah could see his expression change from confusion to panic as Agent Williams began speaking. Marcus Sullivan, you're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit tax evasion. Even from across the street, Sarah could hear the words clearly. Agent Williams' voice carried across the courtyard as camera phones appeared in windows throughout the surrounding buildings. Marcus's hands were cuffed behind his back as Agent Williams continued reading his rights. Victoria stepped away from him, her face pale with shock or calculation. Sarah couldn't tell which. Victoria Blake, Agent Williams turned to Sarah's former friend. You're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering and accessory to securities fraud. Victoria's confident facade crumbled instantly. She began protesting loudly, claiming she had no knowledge of any crimes, but a female agent was already approaching with handcuffs. This is incredible, Sarah whispered, watching her two primary tormentors being led away in handcuffs. This is just the beginning, James replied. The IRS seized all of Marcus's accounts this morning. The SEC is freezing Tech Vault's assets pending investigation, and immigration is reviewing Victoria's visa status in light of the criminal charges. What happens to Tech Vault? The board will probably try to distance themselves from Marcus and restructure. But without the stolen algorithm as their competitive advantage, they're just another mid-tier tech company. Sarah watched as Marcus and Victoria were placed in separate FBI vehicles. Marcus caught sight of the parking garage where she was watching, and their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, she saw raw hatred in his expression, but it was quickly replaced by something that looked like fear. The man who had humiliated her in front of the world was now being humiliated in front of that same world. The difference was that Marcus's humiliation was earned. How did you coordinate all this? Sarah asked as the FBI vehicles drove away. Turns out when you have solid evidence of federal crimes, law enforcement agencies are very motivated to act quickly, James said. Plus, Marcus's arrogance worked against him. He kept committing new crimes even after the investigation started. Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications as news of the arrest spread across social media. The same platforms that had mocked her months earlier were now covering Marcus's downfall. Tech Vault CEO arrested in federal fraud investigation. Silicon Valley power couple facing multiple felonies. Pregnant mistress arrested with married CEO. The narrative had shifted completely. Sarah was no longer the abandoned pregnant wife. She was the whistleblower who had helped expose a massive corporate fraud. James Mitchell gets the credit for the investigation, Agent Williams had told reporters. But his daughter, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, provided crucial technical expertise that helped us understand the scope of the financial crimes. Dad, you're giving me credit I don't deserve. You deserve a lot more credit than you've been getting. That algorithm Marcus stole, the government licensing deal I mentioned, is worth $8.7 million. Sarah stared at her father in shock. $8.7 million? Plus royalties on any commercial applications they develop. Turns out your graduate school project has significant national security implications. But Marcus commercialized a simplified version. The real algorithm is much more complex, which is why it's worth so much money. The government has been looking for exactly this kind of data processing capability. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. 24 hours ago, she'd been facing criminal charges and homelessness. Now she was looking at financial independence and vindication. What happens next? Next, you sign the licensing agreement and use the money to start your own company. Marcus thought he could steal your work and discard you. Instead, he's going to watch you build an empire with the algorithm he never really understood. They drove home through the Silicon Valley landscape that had felt so hostile just hours before. Now it looked different, not like Marcus's kingdom, but like a place where innovation and justice could coexist. There's one more thing, James said as they pulled into the driveway of the house Sarah was supposed to vacate. The foreclosure on your mortgage has been reversed. Turns out when you arrest someone for fraud, their fraudulent business practices get unwound pretty quickly. I get to keep the house? You get to keep everything Marcus tried to steal from you, plus a federal court order requiring him to publicly acknowledge your authorship of the Tech Vault algorithm. Sarah sat in the pickup truck, staring at the home she thought she was losing forever. The baby kicked energetically, as if celebrating the victory. "Dad, how do I ever thank you for this?" James Mitchell smiled and patted his daughter's hand. "You thank me by raising my grandchild to know that sometimes the good guys actually win." As they walked toward the house, Sarah realized this wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about reclaiming her identity as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, innovator and entrepreneur, rather than Sarah Sullivan, abandoned wife. Marcus had tried to erase her, but instead he had inadvertently freed her to become who she was always meant to be. The algorithm of betrayal had finally produced its intended result, just not the way Marcus had expected. 6 weeks after Marcus's arrest, Sarah gave birth to Emma Mitchell. 8 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect health and fierce determination. Sarah chose to give her daughter her own last name, severing the final legal connection to Marcus Sullivan. The delivery room was filled with unexpected joy. James Mitchell held his granddaughter with the gentle strength of a man who had built houses with his hands for 40 years. Dr. Chen smiled as she completed the post-delivery examination, noting that both mother and baby showed no signs of the stress that had complicated the pregnancy. "She's going to be a fighter, just like her mother," James said, cradling Emma against his chest. Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. After months of chaos and betrayal, she was finally holding the one thing that had made everything worthwhile. Emma was healthy, beautiful, and completely hers. The hospital room was filled with flowers from unexpected sources. Agent Williams had sent a congratulations bouquet with a note. "Future engineers need strong role models." Dr. Chen's gift was accompanied by a card reading, "Stress Management Success Story." Even some of Sarah's former MIT classmates had reached out after seeing the news coverage of Marcus's downfall. "Any word on the trial?" Sarah asked her father while Emma slept in her arms. "Marcus pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence, 5 years in federal prison, plus restitution to investors. Victoria's cooperation got her a reduced sentence, 2 years and deportation afterward. And Tech Vault? Restructured and sold to a competitor for parts. The algorithm theft was too public for them to recover as a brand." Sarah had watched the company's collapse from the hospital, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret. Tech Vault had been built on lies, and lies always eventually crumbled under their own weight. The more interesting development was the future she was building. Mitchell Innovations had been incorporated while Sarah was still in the hospital. The government licensing deal provided initial funding, but Sarah had bigger plans. The simplified algorithm Marcus had stolen was just one application of her broader research into data processing optimization. "The patent applications are moving quickly," James reported, scrolling through emails on his tablet. "The Technology Transfer Office at MIT wants to feature your work in their alumni magazine. 8 years after graduation, they finally want to feature my work?" Success has a way of making people remember contributions they previously overlooked. Sarah had hired 3 former Tech Vault engineers who had been laid off during the company's collapse. They were brilliant technologists who had been constrained by Marcus's vision of what the algorithm should do. Now they had freedom to explore applications Sarah had only dreamed about during her marriage. "The team wants to show you the prototype when you're ready," James said. "What prototype?" "Artificial intelligence integration with your core algorithm. They think it could revolutionize everything from medical diagnostics to climate modeling." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully despite the conversation about world-changing technology happening around her. "She's going to grow up in a very different world than I did. She's going to grow up knowing her mother is a brilliant innovator who built an empire through intelligence and determination." The hospital room door opened and Dr. Rodriguez entered, carrying flowers and wearing an expression of nervous uncertainty. "Elena," Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. "Sarah, I hoped I could. I wanted to apologize." James Mitchell stood up, his protective instincts immediately activated. "I think you should leave." "Dad, it's okay," Sarah said, though she made no effort to sound welcoming. Elena approached slowly, as if entering a hostile negotiation. I know my apology doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I regret my choices. Which choices specifically? Spying on me for 5 years or destroying my credibility with the FBI? All of it, everything. I convinced myself I was making smart business decisions, but I was really just helping a criminal destroy someone I cared about. Sarah studied her former mentor's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or continued manipulation. Elena looked older, more tired, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. What do you want from me, Elena? Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. I just wanted you to know that watching Marcus get arrested was the first time in months that I felt like justice still existed in the world. Elena placed the flowers on the bedside table and turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Sarah, you're going to change the world with that algorithm. Marcus never understood what he'd stolen. I don't think any of us did. After Elena left, Sarah sat quietly with Emma, processing the apology she'd never expected to receive. Do you believe her? James asked. I believe she regrets getting caught. Whether she regrets the betrayal itself, I'm not sure it matters anymore. Are you going to forgive her? Sarah considered the question while watching Emma's peaceful sleep. I'm going to focus on building something positive instead of carrying anger about the past. 2 days later, Sarah brought Emma home to the house she'd almost lost. The nursery that had once represented shattered dreams now felt like a sanctuary filled with possibility. Mitchell Innovations had set up temporary offices in the house's guest wing, allowing Sarah to work from home during Emma's early months. The irony wasn't lost on her. The domestic space Marcus had dismissed as unimportant was now the headquarters of what would become his technological successor. The first commercial contracts are coming in, reported Kate Chen, one of the engineers Sarah had hired. 3 healthcare companies want to license the diagnostic applications. 2 financial firms are interested in the fraud detection capabilities. What about timeline for full commercial deployment? 6 months for beta testing, another 6 for full rollout. We're looking at a very different competitive landscape by next Christmas. Sarah bounced Emma gently as she reviewed the business projections. The numbers were staggering. Mitchell Innovations was positioned to generate more revenue in its first year than TechVault had managed in its best year. Marcus built a company around a stolen, simplified version of your work, Kate explained. We're building a platform around the complete algorithm that he never really understood. That evening, as Sarah fed Emma and watched the sunset over Silicon Valley, she reflected on the journey from betrayal to triumph. The pain of Marcus's public humiliation had been real, but it had also been necessary. Without that betrayal, Sarah might never have discovered her own strength or reclaimed her identity as an innovator. Emma finished her bottle and settled against Sarah's shoulder, making the small, contented sounds of a well-fed baby. In a few months, Emma would be old enough for Sarah to start traveling to conferences and client meetings. By the time Emma was walking, Mitchell Innovations would likely be one of the most prominent technology companies in Silicon Valley. Your daddy tried to erase Mommy from the history books, Sarah whispered to Emma, but instead, he gave Mommy the motivation to write a completely new chapter. The algorithm of betrayal had run its course, generating unexpected outputs that transformed every variable in the equation. Sarah Mitchell was no longer the abandoned wife of a tech CEO. She was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, founder and CEO of the company that would define the next generation of artificial intelligence. And Emma Mitchell would grow up knowing that sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most extraordinary comebacks. 1 year later, Sarah stood on the stage of the Tech World Conference, the same event where Marcus had once given keynote speeches about vision and innovation. Now she was the featured speaker, addressing 3,000 technology leaders about the future of ethical artificial intelligence. Emma sat in the front row with James, wearing a tiny dress that read, "Future Engineer," and clapping enthusiastically at random moments. At 14 months old, she had inherited Sarah's determination and James's unshakable confidence in the face of authority. Artificial intelligence isn't just about processing power, Sarah told the audience. It's about understanding the human element in every algorithm we create. The speech was being live-streamed to over 1 million viewers worldwide. Mitchell Innovations had become synonymous with responsible AI development, setting industry standards for ethical data processing and transparent algorithmic decision-making. When we develop technology, we're not just writing code. We're writing the rules that will govern how future generations interact with information, how they make decisions, how they understand their world. Sarah had intentionally chosen this conference for her first major public address since Marcus's arrest. Tech World had been his domain for 5 years, and she wanted to demonstrate that leadership in Silicon Valley could be about substance rather than showmanship. The algorithm that founded Mitchell Innovations was originally stolen and commercialized without my knowledge or consent, Sarah continued, addressing the controversy directly. But theft taught me something valuable about the responsibility that comes with innovation. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Sarah's story had become legendary in tech circles. The brilliant engineer who had been betrayed by her husband and mentor, only to build an empire that surpassed both of their accomplishments. We have an obligation to ensure that our innovations serve humanity rather than exploiting it. Technology should empower people, not manipulate them. After the speech, Sarah was surrounded by reporters, investors, and fellow entrepreneurs. The contrast with her last public appearance at a tech event was stark. Instead of being humiliated and abandoned, she was being celebrated and courted. Dr. Mitchell, can you comment on rumors that Mitchell Innovations is developing medical AI that could revolutionize cancer diagnosis? We're always exploring applications that could improve human health and well-being. Any specific announcements will come through proper channels. What's your response to Marcus Sullivan's recent interview where he claimed partial credit for your algorithm? Sarah smiled calmly. Mr. Sullivan is entitled to his opinions from federal prison. The intellectual property courts have already settled questions about algorithm authorship. Marcus had indeed given an interview to a business magazine, attempting to rehabilitate his image by claiming he had been a collaborative partner in developing the technology. The article had been quickly debunked by MIT professors who confirmed Sarah's sole authorship of the original research. Dr. Mitchell, are you concerned about competing with former colleagues who learned from your work at TechVault? Competition drives innovation. I welcome former TechVault employees to develop their own approaches to AI development. The field is large enough for multiple perspectives. Sarah had actually hired several of Marcus's former employees, recognizing that many of them were talented engineers who had been constrained by his poor leadership. Two of her former adversaries were now key contributors to Mitchell Innovations' research team. After the conference, Sarah returned to her hotel suite where Emma was napping under James's watchful supervision. How did it go? James asked quietly. Better than I expected. 3 potential partnerships, 2 acquisition offers, and 1 marriage proposal from a venture capitalist who apparently finds successful women irresistible. Are you considering any of the offers? Sarah looked out the window at the Silicon Valley landscape that had once felt so hostile. The partnerships, yes. The acquisition offers and marriage proposal, no. Mitchell Innovations was approaching a valuation of $500 million, but Sarah had no intention of selling. She'd built something more valuable than money, a company culture based on integrity and innovation rather than exploitation and theft. There's something else, James said, handing her a legal document. The final settlement from Marcus's restitution payments. Sarah scanned the paperwork. Marcus had been ordered to pay damages to everyone he'd defrauded, including Sarah. The amount was substantial, enough to fund Mitchell Innovations' expansion for the next 5 years without outside investment. Blood money, Sarah said quietly. Justice money, James corrected. Money that should have been yours from the beginning. Emma woke up from her nap and immediately reached for Sarah, babbling enthusiastically about her day with Grandpa. Sarah lifted her daughter, marveling at how much Emma had grown in just 14 months. She's starting to say mama more clearly, James reported, and she definitely knows the word no. Wonder where she gets that determination from, Sarah laughed. That evening, as they prepared to fly back to San Francisco, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Agent Williams. Dr. Mitchell, I wanted to give you an update on the Victoria Blake situation. What about her? She's been released from federal custody and is scheduled for deportation to the UK next month. but she's requested a meeting with you before she leaves the country. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching Emma play with her travel toys. What does she want? She claims she has information about other technology companies where Marcus may have used similar fraudulent practices. She's offering to cooperate in exchange for a chance to apologize to you in person. Is the information credible? Our initial assessment suggests it could be. Victoria kept detailed records of Marcus's activities, apparently as insurance against exactly what ended up happening. Sarah considered the request. She had no desire to see Victoria again, but the information could help other victims of Marcus's schemes receive justice. I'll meet with her, but only in your office, with you present. Understood. I'll arrange something for next week. The meeting took place in Agent Williams's San Francisco field office on a gray Tuesday morning. Victoria looked dramatically different from the confident influencer who had stolen Sarah's husband. Prison had aged her, and impending deportation had stripped away her glamorous facade. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Victoria said quietly. Sarah remained standing, making it clear this would be a brief encounter. Agent Williams says you have information about other victims. Marcus used the same playbook at his previous companies. Find brilliant women, steal their ideas, then discard them when they became inconvenient. Victoria pulled out a thick folder. I documented everything because I was afraid he'd eventually do the same thing to me. Agent Williams reviewed the documents while Sarah watched Victoria's body language. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. Why are you doing this now? Sarah asked. Because I spent 2 years in prison thinking about what I'd done. Not just to you, but to my own daughter. Sarah hadn't known Victoria had a child. Your daughter? She's 3 now, living with my parents in London. She doesn't know who I am because I chose to destroy another woman's family instead of building my own. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. I watched you at that gala, Sarah. You were 7 months pregnant, and I felt nothing but jealousy. I wanted your life so badly that I was willing to destroy it. And now I know that the life I stole wasn't worth having. Marcus discarded me the moment I became inconvenient, just like he discarded you. The difference is that you were strong enough to fight back. Sarah studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. She saw only exhaustion and regret. The information you're providing, will it help other women? 3 companies, at least 6 victims. Women who had their ideas stolen and their reputations destroyed. Victoria met Sarah's eyes directly. Women like you who deserve better. Agent Williams finished reviewing the documents. This is substantial, Dr. Mitchell. We could potentially help multiple victims receive justice and compensation. Sarah nodded slowly. Then it's worth pursuing. Victoria stood to leave, then paused. Sarah, I know this doesn't change anything, but I'm truly sorry. You were a good friend, and I destroyed that friendship for something that was never real. Victoria, Sarah said quietly, I hope you find a way to build something meaningful with your daughter. After Victoria left, Agent Williams walked Sarah to the elevator. That was generous of you. It wasn't about generosity. It was about making sure other women don't go through what I experienced. 6 months later, the additional investigations led to criminal charges against 2 other tech executives and financial settlements for 8 women whose intellectual property had been stolen. Sarah's willingness to meet with Victoria had opened the door to justice for multiple victims. Mitchell Innovations continued to grow rapidly, but Sarah was careful to maintain the company culture she'd envisioned. Every employee received equity shares. Every algorithm was developed transparently. Every business decision was evaluated through the lens of ethical impact. On Emma's 2nd birthday, Sarah threw a party in the backyard of the house she'd almost lost. The guest list included her engineering team, Agent Williams, Dr. Chen, and even Elena Rodriguez, who had slowly rebuilt their friendship through consistent actions rather than empty apologies. Look what you built, James said, watching Emma toddle around the yard while employees' children played together. We built it, Sarah corrected. You, me, Emma, everyone here. James smiled and raised his beer bottle in a toast. To the algorithm of justice. Sarah clinked her glass against his. To the algorithm of family. As the sun set over Silicon Valley, Sarah realized that Marcus's betrayal had ultimately led her to discover who she really was. Not just as an engineer or entrepreneur, but as a woman capable of transforming devastating betrayal into lasting justice. Emma would grow up in a world where her mother was known not as a victim, but as a leader who had changed an entire industry's approach to ethical innovation. The algorithm of betrayal had run its final iteration, generating outputs that exceeded every parameter Marcus had tried to control. And Dr. Sarah Mitchell had debugged the system completely, creating something beautiful from the wreckage of lies. Sarah Mitchell's story proves that justice isn't always immediate, but it's inevitable when you refuse to surrender your truth. Her algorithm didn't just process data, it processed pain into power, humiliation into strength, and betrayal into the foundation of an empire that changed the tech industry forever. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that comeback stories are written by people who refuse to stay down, then this channel is for you. Hit that like button if you believe in fighting for what's rightfully yours. Drop a comment telling us about a time you turned your lowest moment into your greatest comeback. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we bring you the stories that matter. Tales of resilience, justice, and the kind of courage that changes everything. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own strength today. Because in the end, the algorithms that matter most aren't written in code. They're written in the choices we make when the world tries to erase us. We'll see you in the next story, where ordinary people do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept defeat.